Yes, I know this video is a stolen idea from Nateson, but my views are low, my subs are dropping, and so is the size of my podcast as well, so I've decided to remaster a popular video series during the OG age of Overwatch. If this video does well, I'll do more of these, but until then, I'll keep experimenting with different content. All credit to Nateson for the video series. For reference, instead of doing 4 vague and obscure tips in his videos, I'll cover 6 more clearly defined and more fundamental tips, starting off with the most prominent error I've seen, which is the timing of your pressure. In Platinum, I often see a ton of players, especially Tracer players, actually get a good angle onto the enemy team's backline, but often completely mistime their pressure for when their team are pushing in. For instance, let's take an example on Basan Sanctuary. Tracers will often flank coast side all the way onto backline, but will pay no attention to when their team are pushing in. This means that the enemy team can easily clear and deal with the Tracer, since she's the only threat to be dealt with at the time. This leads to Tracer being cleared, forcing her recall, making the fight a 6v5 for the enemy team. This is also pretty common with off tanks. On D.Va, players usually take too much damage before the fight actually begins, and start playing too aggressively too early on. Here's an example from a D.Va VOD I did with Spilo, and even though that this is from a higher rank game, the advice definitely still applies and is more prominent in these lower ranks.
We're like astonishingly low in HP in this fight. Like, I just want to look at your teammates' HP. Full HP, full HP, full HP, full HP, full HP. And then this is like, you're like the runt of the litter. Like, what on earth is going on here?
Not to mention also like the very liberal use of Matrix. Like,
oh, true. I didn't even notice that.
If they had graph here, this is a free graph for Zarya.
And it's like, now this means that this Zen, like your Ryan's going to be under pressure, your Brig's going to be under extra pressure from their Zen. They're more likely to, land their micro missiles, land their fire strikes. And again, you don't have the micro missiles either. So this is actually shockingly mediocre cooldown usage.
Conversely, on the complete other end of the spectrum, there's players who take no angle at all and just stack main behind shield thinking they're doing their job. There's often no in between when considering players in Platinum who have no concept of timing their pressure but are actually on a decent angle, and players who time their pressure well as they stand behind their main tank, but as a result they don't end up contributing much to the team fight and often get out damaged by players who do take angles. This is super common with Zarya players who are just stuck onto their Reinhardt or just off tank players in general. Hitscan players often make this crucial mistake as well. Let's take this example on Route 66 first point attack. Time and time again I'll see a Sigma or a McCree or an Ashe sit on cart when they should ideally be on high ground. Not to mention, high ground can also give you options, as it's pretty common for players to rotate through the upper cave and take another angle onto the enemy team. Dorado first point is also another great example of this. Most plat players will just group up together and try to push themselves through this narrow choke when they'd actually be safer and dealing more damage if they just took the time to rotate to high ground. Again, you do have multiple options available to you in terms of how aggressive you want to play, and you will see the higher ranked players control this high ground. In fact, when you're attacking Dorado first point, you've probably had a flanker or a hitscan DPS beam you from behind whilst you're sat at choke. The next tip to mention is the, generally speaking, very lazy cooldown management. Common examples would be a Reinhardt wasting his shield before the fight even begins, or a Zarya being unable to bubble her Reinhardt when he pushes up aggressively, or an Ana randomly yeeting her nade and slip dart into the enemy Reinhardt shield. This isn't to say that these errors don't occur beyond the higher levels, because they certainly do, but for me at least, it's a lot more noticeable in the metal ranks, and especially in Platinum, where players are renowned for going on autopilot in their games, and this is one of those aspects. Even with some of the quote-unquote easier heroes, such as Moira, I see a ton of Moiras overuse their heal spray on squishy DPS and waste their fade and orbs constantly. So how do you fix this issue? Well, it's primarily just timing. Stop using Zarya bubbles, or Ana's abilities, or Bap's regen burst, or Brig's whip shot, or most abilities in the game the second you see the enemies pop up on your screen. Wait for when either team engages and you'll gain a ton more value from your respective abilities. The next tip, whilst a bit cliche, is your mental. Now I know that every rank in the game is prone to tilting, but from my experience and from what I've seen, diamond players are often more chill than hard-stuck plat players who are just inches away from escaping the metal ranks. It doesn't help that high platinum is arguably one of the hardest ranks to climb through due to the density and variety of the players that you'll come across. Even players who do unranked GMs will acknowledge the pain of climbing past 2900 SR. So the solution to these mental problems is redirecting the goal from gaining SR to improving as a player, and instead of blaming the system, constructively critiquing your own performance. Here's SVB explaining the fundamental behind keeping a cool head mid-game.
But the main issue that people have is that they get the order of events completely the wrong way around. The rating increase will always come after you improve, never before. How do you expect to be rated higher if you never become a better player? People get mad at the rating system because they think it's telling them a lie, or they think that they should be higher. Put it in another context. Imagine you really want to be a 200-meter sprinter. Getting mad at the rating system because you don't think that number is right is like getting mad at a stopwatch after you finish last in the race because you don't think the time was right. Sure, maybe the stopwatch is old, maybe it was started too early, and maybe the screen is a little faded, but you still lost the race, and the watch is just counting time, so how wrong could it really be? Who should you actually be upset with, the stopwatch or your performance?
Of course, in Overwatch, there are going to be games which are going to be inherently unwinnable, no matter how hard you try. Even the best player in the world won't win every game and every matchup they come across. Focusing on raising your average performance will help you climb a star over time, rather than putting all your energy into getting tilted off one game. The penultimate tip between climbing from plat to diamond is the disproportional increase in mechanical skill between the two ranks. So, what do I mean by this? Well, obviously as you go up each rank, most players are going to improve mechanically, but in diamond, players often have better than expected mechanical skill at expense of their game sense. Here's SVB explaining the difference.
When I returned to Diamond with my DPS ult, the first thing that struck me was how good a lot of the players were, mechanically speaking. Even in Platinum, you will find certain DPS players who actually have fantastic aim and barely miss shots, but in Diamond, it's even more common. You'll often find Widowmakers who aim like they should be in Masters, or maybe even GM with a slight improvement, and you'll often find Anas who are really scary to come up against and barely miss a sleep dart, or are able to pluck fires out the sky.
Later in the video, he uses this graph to show the abnormal spike in mechanical skill that diamond players often have. Now, this of course causes a problem with diamond players themselves when referring to the difference between diamond and master players, but if you're platinum playing up against a bunch of diamonds, you may be outclassed just by mechanical differences. So what's the solution? Well, there are multiple. The most obvious one is to improve your mechanics using workshop codes or Kovacs or other different methods of mechanical training in order to close a slightly greater than normal mechanical gap. However, this unusual increase in mechanics for diamond players also means that there isn't that large of a gap in terms of game sense. This means that using the other tips prior about being on an angle that's actually timed well with your team and isn't on either end of the extreme will do the most work for you. The last quote-unquote tip, and this was taken from the original Nateson video and is still true to this day, is that there are a ton of Junkrat players in Platinum. In almost every Platinum Anubis game, there will always be a Junkrat Symmetra on the enemy team on defense, and I'm sure most players watching this video will have experienced both full holding Anubis and also being full held against double projectile. It gets even worse on console, with these projectile heroes dominating the lower elo players who are obviously going to have a harder time controlling hit scan weapons with a thumbstick. The solution to this is to obviously run Pharah into these heroes, but people who often think that Pharah is flat out not viable past the metal ranks are, in my opinion, quite wrong. If anyone's watched my Pharah guide, you'll know that Yuzna has essentially developed the mainstream Pharah playstyle that all high rank Pharahs have to use in order to get any value. So if you are struggling in getting value with Pharah in any elo, but especially once you climb out of plat, I highly recommend watching that guide. Well, that's the video. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed, don't forget to like, comment and subscribe, and if this video helped to raise your IQ, be sure to share it with your friends to also raise theirs. Until next time.
And I say, hey, living